So we've talked in the past few days about me doing a series of videos that would culminate in this one. Today is April the 4th. Jupiter and Pluto conjunct today. Mercury and Neptune conjuncted yesterday. That was my last video. And on April the 8th, there's going to be a full moon in the sign of Libra. And before we headed to that full moon, we thought we would do a series of videos. I thought I would do a series of videos. And this is the last one of that series. Somewhere this discusses a number of important transits, starting with the fact that April the 4th is exactly 2 months before the June 4th lunar eclipse in the new sign of Gemini, the first of the Gemini eclipses. So the week before April the 4th and a week after April the 4th as being perhaps important markers or a way in which the eclipses, this new cycle of eclipses, announces itself. It'll help to pay attention to what has come up. As I mentioned, and this is unfortunately true, not only because of the virus, but even in general, kind of an overwhelming number of people passing on and transitioning in this week before, week after the eclipse. But there's a separate video, the first of the videos I did talking about all this, kind of the Jupiter, that had to do with 2 months before the June 4th eclipse. You can refer to that. I'll put a link to that at the end of this. It was, I think, the first of these videos, and then we started to talk about various timelines that are being proposed to some extent. The Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjunctions with Mars in Capricorn, that is supposed to be, from a Western astrology perspective, defining or describing the current pandemic. And then we talked about a few other transits that were going on. And today's conversation is about the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. What do we know so far on a personal level? We know that these conjunctions and these transits that are significant are happening in the sign of Capricorn. So it becomes helpful to know where Capricorn sits in your chart. We also know that since July 2018, the eclipses of release have been in this part of the chart. So not only do we have these heavy-hitting planets, Saturn since December 2017, Pluto since way before then, Jupiter since November the since December the 8th, or November the 8th. One of the two, November, December 2019, not that long ago, 5 or 6 months ago, in the sign of Capricorn as well. And Jupiter here, Saturn here, the eclipses of release here, and Pluto here make for a heady combination. And then we had Mars come in here, let's see, in the middle of February and for all of March. And it was, and we've had a various succession of these planets kind of making contact with each other. So on a personal level, we know that the eclipses of release are in this part of the chart, and we know that while other planets have been exercising their influence here, most notably, whenever Pluto transits a certain part of the chart, it would help to know where Capricorn sits in your chart, because that part of the chart is going through a significant, unmistakable transformation. Power dynamics can be highlighted. There is, Pluto is the planet of death and transformation of a kind that we are powerless against. Pluto comes in and kind of takes this wrecking ball to whatever it is that is in its way. Ultimately, to some extent, with Pluto and the South Node eclipses, you have to release things that the universe has deemed are no longer useful or helpful for you, and resistance to that release is what creates the tension and the difficulty with these transits and with these eclipses. I won't go on and on about this because I've done so in other videos, but it's a quick summary here. Saturn's presence in any part of the chart, and Saturn is strong in Capricorn, a sign that it owns and rules, requires that we look at beliefs and patterns especially, and boundaries that are no longer serving us but have been in place for a while. So Saturn comes in, requires us to look at what it is that is holding us back from fulfilling our potential, from achieving what we're here to achieve, to be our most successful, practical, contributing selves to society, but not just in that regard, really climbing to the top of whatever it is that we're here to do, in a certain sense, being the best version of ourselves. But Saturn's way of doing so is pretty, it's very much like the strict teacher at school, or the strict martial arts teacher who wants you to learn how to break boards and achieve what you need to achieve and be this shining, this fruitful creature who has self-mastery. That's what Saturn is about, and that's what Capricorn is about. So somewhere this strange combination of having to be responsible and work hard and chip away at whatever it is that Capricorn is asking us to do on a day in, day out basis, but also make sure that we're releasing what either Pluto deems needs to be burned to the ground, or releasing what the eclipses of release are asking us to let go of that is in our comfort zone. But it's hard to let go of because it gives us a false sense of security, and that sense of security is false because the eclipses are trying to get us to head in the opposite direction. For people who don't know where Capricorn sits in the chart, Capricorn really ultimately, from a societal perspective, the most conservative in-place structures, the most conservative definitions of success kind of sit within the realm of Capricorn. It's interesting because it's given this very sort of masculine CEO kind of quality to it, climbing to the very top. What is conventional success? The big paycheck, the big job title, not just content to be a professor, but to head the department, to become the president of the school, not just content to be a manager in the department, to be the CEO of the company, to acquire other companies, to be on the top, to win the Nobel Prize, to win the Oscar, that kind of conventional definition of success. And how do you get to it? Right behind it, of course, is the question of how can you be excellent at whatever it is that you do. But the measure of excellence and self-mastery is very tied in Capricorn terms to worldly success and the sign of Capricorn and being effective and having a certain amount of power. And so when these planetary transits affect the sign of Capricorn, the conventional Western astrological viewpoint on this is that conservative, traditional power structures are having to be redefined. There's also a certain amount of resistance. It's an open question in 2020 being an election year. We'll see what happens to the election depending on the way the year is going. But there's an open question as to why it is that this transition has to be so labored. I've already answered this with regard to resistance, but it certainly seems like the conservative and the conventional are kind of here, are digging their heels in and are here to stay. So with some of these transits coming to a head, and by the time 2021 is over, Jupiter and Saturn will have moved on into Aquarius by the time 2020 is done, and the eclipses of release will have moved on to the sign of Gemini to Sagittarius from Capricorn. So this is the year, as I've described in other videos, that the forest fire that has been raging in Capricorn gets to finally blaze out, and Jupiter creates these new shoots of green that can emerge from this kind of burnt soil. But what does that look like? Right now, certainly things look bleak and Capricornian and kind of intense, and it feels like the structures that we're trying to fight against, the conservative structures that we're trying to fight against, are really digging their heels in. So we're going to need to see whether this greening and burning to the ground and a revolution, for lack of a better word, really comes to pass, or whether Saturn's presence in Capricorn really kind of creates a bit of a battle with Jupiter coming in and trying to exercise whatever it's trying to exercise. All these planets that are in Capricorn are ruled by Saturn. Saturn rules Capricorn, so Jupiter is under Capricorn's thumb, as is Pluto. And with Saturn's presence here, Saturn is this kind of strict, responsible teacher. Saturn is not about joy and fun, or even if it is about joy and fun, it's the kind of planet that says you can have fun, but between 6 and 6:30 p.m. And by the way, when you're out having fun, you've got to play as part of a team. And so if you're going to play football, it's just like, okay. Saturn is certainly not about indulgence. And if anything, it's about punishing indulgence. So it's not an indulgent time. The first of the conjunctions that seems to have defined the timeline that we're in occurred in December when Saturn and Jupiter met up. Saturn and Pluto met up. And Saturn has since moved on from Pluto. And really, if we look at when it occurred in December, one could argue that the virus started to make its presence felt make its presence felt. It may have been around for longer than that. The first cases may have appeared before, but remember when we're talking about a conjunction, especially slow-moving planets like Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto, it's the days or the weeks as those conjunctions come within, I feel, about 5 degrees of each other. So we could be talking a few weeks before that conjunction actually occurred. So Saturn and Pluto met up, and Saturn has now moved on, and actually now it's moved into Aquarius briefly between now and the end of June. It's going to be in Aquarius for about a couple of years after the end of this year. Mars comes into Capricorn, and Mars is the martial, combat, war, the god of war, planet of war, action, drive, getting things done. Comes into the sign of Capricorn and brings its own kind of kind of its own wrecking ball energy, and it certainly did. Mars, close to the end of March and into early April, but certainly the middle to end of March, met up with Jupiter first, and then Pluto, and then Saturn on the 31st of March. And so certainly Mars's presence here has expanded and accelerated, that's the word I will use, and created one hell of an impact and put us into this kind of warlike situation with the virus. Jupiter and Pluto meet up today, and this is something that I've talked about. It's very like Saturn to come in and make an impact on Pluto to start things off, and then to move on and to let all these planets do their work while it sits and rules itself and moves into Aquarius briefly. Saturn rules Aquarius as well, but Aquarius is a very different dynamic than Capricorn. If Capricorn is about rigidity and structure and preservation and the classical and the conservative, Aquarius is all about the lack of convention. It's really interesting that Saturn, this planet of discernment, rules both the most conventional of signs and the most unconventional of signs, and it rules them in its own way. When it comes to the sign of Aquarius, people attribute Pisces-like tendencies to Aquarius, as I've discussed before, kind of hippiness and a kind of hair and age of Aquarius. But Aquarius is very rigorous, very scientific, very discerning, very practical. It is about benefiting humanity, but through science, vaccinations, and technology, and provable things that work, and data, and it's extraordinarily discerning, the opposite of faith. It's not ruled by Jupiter, and yet we give it this kind of expansive Jupiterian quality, whereas Aquarius is, it's a little bit like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I don't know what those chart placements are like, or where the sun is in those charts, or the ascendants are in those charts, but it's we're going to help, and we're going to contribute, and we're going to make a massive impact, but it's going to be very discerning, it's going to be very scientific, and it's going to be very data-based, and we're going to have to prove that it works. And if someone's going to argue with it on the basis of woo-woo thoughts around vaccinations, and if you've really got, we need the data. So it's a very Saturn-like in that regard too. Saturn goes from being unrevolutionary and preserving of conventional structures to wanting to question and change and benefit humanity and kind of be on the leading edge, but in a very discerning way. What is best for the world. And so Saturn is there briefly right now, and Mars met up with it there. So it'll be interesting to see when Saturn comes back into Capricorn in the second half of this year, how it chooses to wrap things up. Well, Jupiter and Pluto. Jupiter has been given this kind of expansive quality, and I find it only true if you're on the right path. So take what I'm saying and try to get it to apply both to you personally, if you know where Capricorn sits in your chart, and even look at it from a global perspective. Whenever Jupiter does a transit, the conventional astrology suggests that you're going to get that award, or you're going to get those $1 million, or you're going to get that promotion. And as my clients know, I've also warned them that when Jupiter comes in, it has a tendency to identify what needs to be removed. It creates a beginning. It creates a new beginning. It's an end of a 12-year cycle. It's the start of a 12-year cycle. And it creates what one astrologer I consulted with a couple of times actually, he used the term auspicious new beginning. Jupiter is conventionally considered the lucky planet, or one of the two auspicious planets, along with Venus. And Saturn, along with Mars, is considered an unlucky planet. it really depends. It's focused on how we experience them. Of course, we want ease, and we don't want adversity. The question of whether what is actually lucky and what is unlucky, as an astrologer, I really question strongly, because I find that sometimes with Mars and with Saturn, greater productive progress is made than with Venus and Jupiter, which can tend to get you to sit back. Jupiter does really, wherever it is, create an ending and a new beginning, and an auspicious new beginning, and it kind of has its own way of coming and saying that couch needs to go, we're going to create a blank space and we're going to start something, we're going to start a 12-year cycle. And often that start is very, very small. It is a trickle that then eventually turns into a river. It's those first drops. So sometimes people may expect, if Jupiter's transiting your career house, for example, may expect a promotion, and you can get laid off, or you can get fired, or you can choose to leave and start something on the side. An auspicious new beginning, it doesn't feel all that lucky, does it, when it happens? But it may turn out to be the lucky break. Well, Jupiter is also considered the planet of expansion, and conventional Western astrology would suggest that anything it touches, it expands. Pluto, as I've said in my last couple of videos, is the planet of death and transformation. The first of these conjunctions is today, and so we have experienced with Mars in its typical combative, let's make something loud manner, and Jupiter now have certainly expanded our understanding, our visibility of the pandemic so far. Jupiter meets up with Pluto, goes retrograde, meets up with Pluto again, because actually, let's do it this way. Jupiter and Pluto, Pluto moving slower than Jupiter. Jupiter moves past Pluto today. Pluto's going to go retrograde, and then Jupiter go retrograde, and both of them meet up at the same degree they're at today, at the end of June, June 29th, and then as they move direct, Jupiter and Pluto meet up one last time on November the 12th. They meet up 3 times. So the question from this pandemic perspective becomes that it introduces a new timeline that starts to take us to the end of this year, if these transits have anything to do with this pandemic. Then, interestingly, once Jupiter is done, Saturn, which is in Aquarius, is going to go retrograde, and then at the end of June move back into Capricorn. So Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn do this kind of dance where it's only Jupiter and Pluto that conjunct 3 times or 2 more times after today. Saturn does not meet up with Pluto again. They get close to each other. This is what announced the pandemic thing. It's just like, what is going to happen? And then ultimately, when Jupiter goes direct in the middle of September, on December the 21st, both Jupiter and Saturn in December move into the sign of Aquarius, and then on the 21st meet up in the sign of Aquarius in this unconventional, revolutionary sign. Thinking in terms of music, if Capricorn is a sign of classical music and Mozart and symphonies and Haydn and a certain kind of conventional, or even romantically, classically romantic, then Aquarius is the sign of modern classical music, of Philip Glass and Pärt, and I don't know, Pärt might be argumentative, but all that music that so many of us refuse to listen to because it all sounds computerized and repetitive and way too modern for our taste, highly structured. So play that as it lays. Jupiter and Saturn at the end of this year will move into Aquarius and conjunct there. So December the 21st is the last of these heavy-hitting conjunctions. So does that mean we'll live with the pandemic till the end of the year? One timeline certainly seems to suggest that it's Mars that has created these expansions. So as Mars moves further forward into Aquarius, that we'll start to see some sort of die-out. One timeline suggested that certainly in April and by May, things may start to lift. From a Vedic perspective, a lot of what is occurring is being attributed to a combination Vedic Jyotish Indian astrology perspective, a combination of planets that create a sort of pattern called Kal Sarp Yoga. And the idea is that this starts to dissipate by the end of May. And so a couple of people are saying that it's by the end of May that we'll really start to see a deceleration. Added to that, there's the conventional wisdom that is being touted that as we head into the summer months in the northern hemisphere, there's something about this virus and heat. If we look back at H1N1 and SARS, that when it gets to be warmer temperature-wise, then this virus has a tendency to just disappear. As I've mentioned to you before, I find the whole virus prediction thing a little bit upsetting and disturbing, because if we didn't necessarily see it coming, although a couple of people seem to have emerged that saw it coming, then this whole figuring it out retroactively, I find problematic. I prefer my own kind of feeling of mentioning to you that April is undeniably forward moving, even if it doesn't feel that way. We're going to, by the end of April and the middle of May, be in a new place. What are we learning about what we're able to do online or not be able to do online? How does this affect where we are? We're waiting for the virus to lift. If things start to lift, and let's just say that this new moon of healing, I feel much more comfortable living in the realm of looking at the lunations. So if this last new moon at the end of March was wounding and healing, and if by the end of April we might start to get a glimmer or a ray of where some of the healing or slowdown technologies may appear, do some tests appear that while they don't quite reach global access in the next couple of weeks, does something appear that gives us a sense of how to at least move towards healing? Does something appear that tells us how it is that this can be stopped in some way? And then the next new moon at the end of April has kind of this revolutionary epiphanic quality. So does that, in its own way, also kind of a healing humanity quality? So by the time we do get to the end of May, it's something in the works, something at least that allows us safely to be able to discern which one of us is infected and which one of us is not. So those who are not and may not need to be quarantined, can they get back to work? The new reality in forward movement, as I've mentioned in one of my last couple of videos, when Venus goes retrograde middle of May to the end of June, is the fact that even if we get to a place that people are going to start to be hired back, is everyone going to be hired back? Where the business is going to be? Right now, we're dealing with things on a day-to-day basis, but what is the impact of all of this going to be economically? And all those things that were promised in the pace and rate at which we were going, where will we find ourselves as the fog starts to lift? I see no reason to doubt that the fog won't start to clear sometime in May, even by the end of April, but certainly May into June is the feeling. But if the Jupiter-Pluto transits and the Jupiter-Saturn transits are part of this revolutionary change in the sign of Capricorn and a desire to break down conventional structures and to start to look at things in a more unconventional and a scientific way and a humanitarian way, then some aspect of this may be with us till the end of the year. We're going to keep monitoring it and we'll see. Jupiter-Pluto meeting up today, the expansion of death and transformation, moving forward and then going retrograde. Do we deal with the meet up again at the end of June in the same degree? When the planets go retrograde, what are we going over? Do we expect to see expansion again, or do we actually get to see something that allows us to take stock of the situation and find a way to heal or stop things? And then Jupiter-Pluto meet up again November the 12th, and then Jupiter meets up with Saturn December the 21st and then moves on. So whatever these retrogrades demand of us to examine, and I don't think it's purely on a medical level, it could be on a social and a political level as well. I would not be hasty to prove or run towards Trump's demise. If something were to happen to destabilize Trump, it would need to occur and could occur between June the 20th and August the 20th. But the chart gains in its own kind of strength as we head to the election time. And, again, the election this year is happening around the same date as the full moon in his career house. So does this promise another victory, or does it promise a downfall? Certainly something from a career perspective comes to a head. The last election, in comparison to Hillary Clinton's chart was moving in a more retiring direction, and you had Donald Trump's chart on the day of the last election have a full moon when the election results were announced in his career house. So I would not underestimate the strength in that chart. But there's certainly vulnerability there between June and August as well. So remains to be seen. Do these planets contribute to some sort of an overall destabilizing? Let's bring this to a close because we're 25 minutes in. Whatever I've said in terms of this kind of transformation and the forest fire burning, those of you who have a Capricorn ascendant certainly, or a sun in Capricorn, have felt this for the past few years. So wherever Capricorn is, an Aquarius is, but a Capricorn especially, understand, as I've mentioned before, there's a forest fire burning and there's a greening that is due to occur by the end of the year. From a conventional medical social perspective, let's see, does the fog start to lift by May, end of April, end of May, and then in June? And what does the retrograde bring us? Do we end up staying with this kind of new normal till the end of the year? For me, what is more important and more significant is these lunations and the fact that they each announce something and are trying to help us, but at the same time, this Venus retrograde from mid-May to end June and Mercury retrograde from mid-June to mid-July mean that this accelerated forward movement into a kind of a new place is going to require us to rethink and revalue and redetermine where we are at with regard to our relationships, our financial situation, and our understanding of life before we move forward again. The next forward moving spurt occurs in August. This, out of all of my recent videos, is the least personally practical, but still gives you a heads up as to where it is that some sort of revolution and transformation is going on in your own chart, and where this year could be a year of auspicious new beginnings. With the Jupiter and Capricorn video that I did a while ago, I think I mentioned to you, I did, that luck this year is under Saturn's thumb, and so is going to come from hard work and diligence. It's not going to be there. It's not going to drop into our lap. In fact, it's not going to really be in a place where it can start dropping into our lap till about 2022, once Jupiter starts to move into Pisces, a sign it rules. Then it becomes more comfortable. So whatever luck and new beginnings are available to us will come through diligence and responsibility. But wherever Capricorn sits in your chart, the eclipses of release, new beginnings, restriction, looking at your patterns, behaviors, being strong and responsible, death and transformation, that is where this revolution is occurring. And this is the year that you have been leading up to. This is the year that all the drama has been about. From a social and medical perspective, let's see. Is it the end of May, as the Vedic Jyotish folks are predicting? And they're not saying things are going to be over or healed. They're just saying that the expansiveness, that this growing wave is going to start to slow down at that point. Do we start to see some glimmer of healing by the end of this month, as I've suggested somewhere? It certainly seems like there are tests and things that are being worked on and tested, and at least by the FDA. That seems to be out there. Is there some way of making that more expansive in May, so that maybe at the end of May and in June the fog starts to lift? Maybe. Let's see. But then what of these Jupiter-Pluto transits in November and the Jupiter-Saturn transit in December? Is there a resurgent? Do we have to fight all this once again as we head into the winter months later this year? We're going to wait and see. Okay. This gets us to the end of the importance of this April 4th date today and the week before and week after. And I am frankly looking forward to talking about the April 8th full moon in Libra. If you found this video useful, any of my other videos, check them out. Forward this, share this by all means. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Click on the bell icon next to the subscribe button to be notified when I do new videos. Most of them are much more practical and personal, and frankly, that's the realm I like to be in, and those are the solutions I like to provide. My contact information is in the description area. If you would like to make an easy to read version of your chart, or if you would like a reading, or you want to inquire about rates, you can use that email address. I am slowly catching up, and by tomorrow, Sunday evening, I will be caught up with all my correspondence. So if you have emailed me, just give me another 24 hours or so and you will hear from me. Okay, thank you. I will be back soon.